What happens when a man who clawed his way out of addiction, jail cells, and rock-bottom nights sits across from a talk show host who refuses to believe a person like him can ever truly change? What unfolds next isn't just tension. It's a live wire collision that turns the view into a battlefield. Jelly Roll, the tattooed powerhouse with a past he's fought like hell to outrun, walked onto that stage ready to talk about redemption. But instead of a conversation friendly, he stepped straight into an ambush, face to face with Joy Behar, who seemed determined to rip apart every inch of his journey. That's what this day was. Not just an interview, not just another guest on The View. It was a kind of trial. On one side of the table, Jelly Roll, the guy with tattoos on his hands, a past full of bad choices, and a heart he spent years trying to clean up. On the other side, Joy Behar, sharp tongue, quick jokes, and a habit of acting like she's the judge of everyone who sits in front of her. Jelly Roll didn't walk into The View like a victim. He walked in like a man who knew what he'd done and was still here anyway. Joy sat a few chairs down, watching him. Not with curiosity, not with empathy. To her, he wasn't a father, a husband, or an artist. He was a type. Ex-con, former dealer, redemption story. Good for ratings, easy to poke holes in. Whoopi did the intro, warm and kind, the way she always does. Our next guest has had quite the journey, she said. From spending time behind bars to topping the country charts, please welcome Jelly Roll. He leaned in, gave that big, grateful grin, and nodded. Thank you so much for having me, he said, that southern drawl rolling out slow and honest. I've been watching this show for years, so this is pretty surreal for me. Sarah started with the easy stuff, the music, the tours, the fans. So Jelly, she said, this new album, you've said it's your most personal work so far. What makes it different? He relaxed a little, shoulders dropping as he slipped into a story he'd told 100 times. I think this one's different because it's the first time I really wrote from the other side of the fence, he said. Most my life, I was writing from rock bottom. Now I'm writing from a place where I'm actually trying to build something better. For me, for my little girl, for the people who are still where I used to be. He chuckled softly. Plus, it's wild to go from writing songs in a jail cell to writing them in a tour bus. That'll mess with your head in a good way. The other hosts smiled. They nodded. They liked that line. Joy smirked, almost under her breath. Well, she said lightly, prison stories do sell these days, don't they? It sounded like a joke, but it landed with a little edge that didn't feel like one. Jelly heard it. He glanced over for half a second, clocked the look on her face, then let it slide. He was used to that. Used to being the prison story in someone else's punchline. Sarah kept going. You've been really open about addiction, about messing up, about the people you ran with back in the day. What made you decide to be that honest instead of just trying to hide it? He took a breath, eyes drifting down for a moment before he answered. Because I hid it my whole life, he said, and it damn near killed me. He looked up again, more serious now. I grew up around a lot of bad decisions, a lot of pain. Drugs were normal, jail was normal, chaos was normal, and I became part of that. I wasn't just in the environment. I was feeding it. I was a danger to my own community. I'm not proud of that. I live with it. There was no theatrics in his voice. It was flat, steady, like he was reading a sentence that was already written on his own skin. I hit a point where I realized either I was going to die the way I was living, or my daughter was going to grow up visiting me in prison, or worse, talking about me in past tense. And I couldn't do that to her. I couldn't let my last gift to her be a headstone. For a moment, the table was quiet. Even Joy's smirk faded a notch. And music saved you? Alyssa asked gently. He nodded. Yeah, music was the first thing that let me tell the truth without feeling like I was drowning in it. I'd be in that tiny cell writing verses on the back of commissary receipts, taking all the stuff I hated about myself and turning it into something that might help somebody else one day. When I got out, I wasn't just trying to make songs. I was trying to make amends. He shrugged, a little embarrassed. I still am. He didn't cry. He didn't break down. He just laid it out there. Simple, raw, and plain. Joy leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, watching him like she was grading a performance. The bad boy turned good, she said, lips curling. America does love that plot twist. She smiled like she just delivered a clever line in a comedy club. A few awkward laughs popped up, but they were thin. It wasn't really funny. Jelly gave a polite smile back, but his eyes changed. Just a little. He kept it together. I mean, ma'am, he said, I don't really see it as a plot twist. I see it as survival. I either changed or I kept burying people and eventually myself. He shifted in his seat, heavier now. I know what I did. I know who I hurt. Folks don't have to forgive me. God knows some never will. But I owe it to them to try and be better than the man they remember. That's not PR. That's my life. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't snap. He just told the truth the way he always does. Like he's more afraid of lying than he is of being judged. I was a danger to my own community, he repeated, slower this time. I'm not proud of that. I live with it. Joy didn't blink. She tilted her head, gave a half shrug, and dropped her first real knife on the table. Sure, she said, her voice cool and dismissive. But it's funny how guilt starts talking louder when the checks get bigger. Not a question, not curiosity, just a straight-up accusation wrapped in a snarky little line. She wasn't saying, you've changed. She was saying, you're cashing in. Jelly didn't answer right away. He swallowed hard, jaw tightening for a moment as he forced himself to stay calm. And then Joy's posture tightened, her eyes sharpened. She was ready to prosecute. Be honest, Jelly, she said, leaning forward with that tone people use right before they twist the knife. Are you actually redeemed? Or are you just a walking redemption brand? That's a cold accusation dressed up as a tough question. Then she added, almost with a smirk, I mean, come on. You're basically the poster boy for guilt these days. And guilt, as we both know, sells. The air shifted. It wasn't an interview anymore. It was a setup. The audience felt it. The other host felt it. Jelly felt it most of all. For a second, he sat perfectly still, shoulders squared, hands locked together to keep himself calm. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but the edges were sharper now. A man trying very hard not to let someone drag him back into a version of himself he fought years to kill. Ma'am, he said, choosing each word like he was stepping around landmines. I didn't hire a PR team to clean me up. I crawled out of that pit myself. His voice didn't crack. He didn't try to win sympathy. He just stated it, plain and real. I turned down plenty of offers to polish my story, he continued. People wanted to package my past into some shiny comeback campaign. I said no to every one of them, because if you clean the dirt too much, people stop believing the truth. Joy didn't let him finish. She cut in with a laugh. Dry, dismissive, smug. Right, she said. And the cameras just happened to be rolling while you found your soul? It wasn't a question, it was a slap. Jelly blinked, and for the first time, his jaw tensed hard enough for everyone to see it. He took a slow breath, fighting the anger rising in his chest. But Joy wasn't done. She smelled the moment he got uncomfortable, and instead of easing off, she pushed harder. She laced her fingers, leaned in like a lawyer preparing her closing argument, and hit him with a question that didn't just challenge him. It insulted everything he'd rebuilt. If the record deals dry up tomorrow, she asked, voice icy, are you still this changed man? Or does the halo go back in the closet the second the lights turn off? It landed like a punch. Jelly didn't react right away. His eyes dropped for half a second, like he was grounding himself. His fingers tapped against his knee. His breathing tightened. Joy had crossed lines before, but never like this. Up until now, she'd questioned his past, his motives, his redemption. But then she went somewhere even she usually avoided. Somewhere meant to break him. She leaned back in her chair, narrowed her eyes, and fired the shot she'd clearly been saving. You talk about your daughter a lot, she said casually, almost like she was asking about a hobby. Does she know exactly how many lives her father helped destroy? The studio froze. Jelly Roll didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared at her, stunned, wounded, furious all at once. But Joy wasn't done, not even close. Do the parents of those kids who overdosed clap along at your concerts too? That was no longer journalism. That wasn't even criticism. That was a blade, a deliberate stab at the deepest place in him. The guilt he lived with, the pain he carried, the things he hated most about himself. And she dragged his daughter into it, a child, something he never weaponized, never used, never hid behind. Jelly Roll stood up so fast his chair slid back and nearly tipped. His whole 6-foot frame towered over the table. His voice exploded like thunder, cracking through a quiet sky. Don't you dare drag my daughter into a sentence you've never paid for. It wasn't shouting for attention. It wasn't theatrics. It was the raw anger of a father, a man who had learned to control his rage, who worked every day to bury it, now watching someone go after the one place he refuses to let the world touch. You want to talk about bodies? He continued, voice shaking now, not with rage, but with memory. I carried some of them. I buried some of them. Where were you? Joy blinked. She didn't expect that. She expected him to crumble. Instead, he hit back with truth she wasn't ready for. And Joy, she loved it. She pointed at him as she had just won the jackpot. There it is, she said, smiling like she'd solved a puzzle. That's the inmate, not the inspirational speaker. See? Joy said, shrugging as if she'd simply revealed a hidden camera. You put on a great show, but this right here is who you really are. The first real high-voltage peak of the confrontation hit like a lightning strike. Jelly Roll stood there breathing hard, jaw clenched, eyes burning. For a moment, Jelly Roll just stood there, breathing hard, jaw tight, hands planted on the table. Then something shifted. He pulled his chair forward, sat down deliberately, and locked eyes with her. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, sharper, more controlled. The kind of tone that doesn't need volume to cut someone open. How many mugshots did you survive, Joy? He asked quietly. How many funerals did you attend because of your own choices? Joy blinked, thrown off for the first time. Jelly wasn't the angry criminal she could point at anymore. He just switched roles, from defendant to cross-examiner. No yelling, no slamming the table, just a stone-cold surgical dismantling. He leaned in a little. You keep talking like you know what it's like to crawl out of hell. How many nights did you wake up shaking because you dreamed about someone you couldn't save? How many people did you lose because of something you did? Joy straightened up like she'd been caught off guard, but she wasn't about to let anyone see her flinch. She lifted her chin, folded her arms, and tried to slide back into authority. Someone has to ask what everyone's thinking, she said, voice stiff with self-righteousness. I'm not here to clap for convenient redemption arcs. I'm here to ask the questions people are too afraid to ask. There it was, the declaration she always retreats to. The belief that she speaks for the public, that she's the unofficial moral referee, that her skepticism is a duty, not an indulgence. Jelly Roll stared at her for a long second, the silence pressing heavy between them. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice steady as a scalpel. Okay then, he said quietly. Let me ask you something. Joy swallowed. Name one person you helped off a ledge, he said. One addict you sat with at 3 a.m. while they were trying not to pick up again. One family you walked through a relapse with. Each sentence landed like a hammer, not loud but undeniable. Joy tried to interrupt, but Jelly didn't let her. You talk like you're protecting victims, he continued. But are you? Really? He tilted his head, eyes narrowing just slightly. Or are you just addicted to the sound of your own outrage? And then his silence settled, let the weight of everything they'd just thrown at each other sit in the middle of the table. And he continued to speak. His voice was softer, not weak, not defeated, just honest in a way that cuts deeper than anger ever could. Prison ended, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the desk for a moment. The sentence didn't. I don't get to clock out of what I did just because you see me on TV, he continued. I don't wake up one day and go, well, I'm famous now, so I guess the pain's over. That's not how this works. He looked up, and for a second, he wasn't the tough guy, the star, the guest fighting on live TV. He was just a man telling the truth about what it's like to live with ghosts. I remember the day I got out, he said. People think that's the day you breathe again. But I walked outside, looked at the sky, and it felt heavier than any ceiling I ever stared at in a jail cell. 'Cause that was the sky I'd hurt people under. That was the world I had to walk back into and try to make right. No theatrics, no attempt to make it poetic. Just plain gut-level honesty, the kind most people wouldn't dare say out loud. But Joy didn't pause. She didn't soften. If anything, she doubled down. She shrugged with that dismissive little smirk. Well, she said, guilt sells even better than sin. You've basically turned your remorse into a genre. It was a slap disguised as commentary. She wasn't just questioning his guilt. She was calling it a business strategy, a brand, a style of storytelling he could switch on and off for profit. To her, even the pain he lived with wasn't real. It was content. Jelly Roll slowly exhaled, the kind of breath you take when you're trying not to let something sharp break you open. He didn't shout back. He didn't bite. Instead, he did something even heavier. He told a truth that didn't need volume. If my guilt makes me money, he said, voice steady, I give it away. Joy blinked. If my story makes you uncomfortable, he added, that's not my crime. That's your mirror. Jelly Roll didn't wait for Joy to regroup. He'd been on the defensive long enough. And now his voice sharpened. Not louder, but heavier, clearer, unmistakably in control. You talk about accountability like you invented it, he said, leaning forward just enough to make her stiffen in her chair. All right, let's put some on your tab. The shift was immediate. This wasn't about his past anymore. This was about hers, her choices, her impact, her responsibility. You want to drag my history across this table? He continued. Fine, but you don't get to act like your hands are clean while you're doing it. Joy's lips parted, but nothing came out. The audience didn't make a sound, and Jelly didn't waste a second. How many people, he asked, his voice slow and cutting, decided not to get help because your kind of cynicism told them they'd never outrun their file? Joy's head jerked back the slightest bit. He kept going. How many families chose not to welcome someone home because shows like yours taught them, once a criminal, always a criminal? That one hit hard enough that it showed on her face. How many addicts, he pushed on, gave up on recovery because people like you rolled your eyes at the idea of change? Each question wasn't just a point. Each one was a charge, a piece of evidence in a case she didn't know she was standing trial for. Joy scrambled, voice suddenly shaky in a way it hadn't been once in the entire interview. I'm just asking what people want to know, she said, trying to sound firm. But it came out thin, defensive, almost pleading. Jelly lifted his chin, eyes locked on hers, and delivered the line that completely flipped the room. No, he said. You're asking what keeps ratings up, not what lifts people up. Joy froze. Joy had been losing her grip for several minutes. Her confidence cracked, her comebacks weaker, her voice thinner. And then, out of frustration, out of ego, out of pure refusal to back down, she fired her final, desperate shot. Some things don't deserve forgiveness, she snapped. Some people don't get to come back. Her tone wasn't sharp, it was bitter. And it wasn't aimed just at Jelly Roll. It was aimed at anyone who ever tried to crawl out of a whole life, or their own choices, threw them into. Anyone who ever clawed their way toward redemption only to be told they weren't worth it. Jelly Roll didn't explode. He didn't stand, didn't shout, didn't let his voice shake. He just looked at her. Really looked at her. Then say it plainly, he said. You don't believe in redemption? Not mine. Not anyone's. Joy opened her mouth, but no words came out. You're not protecting the world from people like me, he continued. You're poisoning the world against people like me. His voice stayed low, steady, and cold, because the truth didn't need to be loud. You're not holding me accountable, Joy, he said. You're making it harder for broken people to even try. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Joy seemed stunned. Not guilty, not apologetic, but confronted with something she couldn't joke her way out of. The idea that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the hero in this argument. Then Jelly Roll pushed his chair back, not in anger but in finality. He stood up slowly, as if the decision had settled into his bones. I've already stood in front of real judges, he said, eyes never leaving hers. You're not one of them. Joy stiffened, but said nothing. We're done. He didn't yell it. He delivered it like a verdict. Jelly turned to Whoopi, Sarah, Alyssa, gave them a respectful nod, a quiet, thank you. He didn't so much as glance back at Joy. This wasn't a walk-off of defeat. This was a walk-off of refusal. Refusal to let someone drag him back into the darkness he'd fought his way out of. Refusal to be a punching bag for someone's bitterness. Refusal to let his pain, his growth, or his redemption be reduced to cheap television drama. Jelly Roll didn't storm out. He withdrew. Like a man stepping out of a courtroom that never had the right to try him in the first place, and Joy Behar was left alone at the table, staring into the empty space where a man she tried to break had just stood, realizing far too late that she hadn't exposed him. She'd exposed herself. If this moment hit you as hard as it hit everyone in that studio, then don't just watch it. Join the conversation. Share your thoughts, drop a comment, and hit subscribe so you never miss the stories that pull back the curtain on what really happens when someone finally stands up for themselves.